Thank you, Michael. I can tell you folks that the people here are completely committed to stopping domestic violence. We have a county exec who has taken a stand against domestic violence and has begun these awareness meetings that we have. This is, I think, our third annual, perhaps. We have the representative of the legislature, we have the SO here, we have crime victims, and of course you all know Kathy. If you know anything at all about domestic violence, you know how committed she is to combat domestic violence. I also frankly would like to mention a couple of prosecutors we have in the back of the, I know that's the last thing they want, but I have a team of prosecutors here who are absolutely committed to fighting domestic violence, and without their help I would not be as successful as I am. Ms. Colmone, Mr. Colville, Ms. Godfrey, I think that Jess was here, Ms. Schutzman, and my investigator, Mr. Wysop. And frankly, we should all make a note of our senior investigator, Jim McCoy, an absolute leader in this area. He is the head of the crime victims, the family violence unit, sorry Jim, and does phenomenal work, unsung hero, one of the unsung heroes in this area. The statistical data that involves domestic violence is staggering. In the past 4 years, domestic violence incidences in Ulster County have increased 80%. 80%. If I were standing here this evening and said to you some other area of crime had increased by 80%, you would say we need to do something. Let's say I said DWIs have increased 80% in 4 years, or burglaries, or drug sales. People would call for action. People would call that we need to do something to combat this influx, this epidemic of crime. And that's why I want to extend my heartfelt appreciation to Kathy, because that's what we're doing here. We're trying to bring awareness to a problem, and with that awareness is the first step toward combating this problem. 2 years ago, 3.5% of the adult arrests in Ulster County were domestic violence. Today, that number has risen to 9%. 9%. Now, I can, and I have, and I will continue to prosecute domestic violence. We are quite successful in our prosecutions. We'll investigate and arrest and prosecute and sentence people for domestic violence. But those actions are never going to cure the problem. What we need to do is we need to work together as a community to take action against domestic violence. One of the things that we've done in the district attorneys across the state is we've reached out to our partners in the state legislature and said the laws that we have right now are not strong enough. They're not protecting the victims of domestic violence. And the state Senate has answered, and through their efforts, they have passed a law which I think is one of the most significant changes in domestic violence, and that is the recently passed obstruction of breathing statute. It's a phenomenal statute. Statistically, 65% of all of the victims of domestic violence are victims of some type of strangulation. And with the new law, it not only gives us a new tool in the prosecution, but it brings to the equation a new awareness. The old statute looked at domestic violence as an act of violence, simply an act of violence, like any other assault. But the new statute recognizes what we have been saying for many, many years, which is domestic violence is much greater than an act of physical violence. Domestic violence is about fear. It's about intimidation. It's about control. And the statute that they've passed for us now grants us the ability to prosecute people without finding the actual physical assault. A great statute. It's a great step in the process, and I'm hoping that with actions like that from the state legislature, we'll be able to come back here next year and say, this year, crime is down a little bit, and maybe after that, down a lot. I'd like to tell you a story. When I tell stories about domestic violence, they're not good stories. There's no good endings with domestic violence. But it's a story that I tell because it better than anything I can otherwise explain, it defines domestic violence and the difficulties that we have. I got a call one Sunday morning from ADA Colmone. She said, "We've got a pretty bad domestic violence down here in Kingston. You want to come down?" I said, "All right." And we went down, we went over to the scene of the crime. Horrific, horrific crime. The kind of things that we see in domestic violence all too often. The woman was the victim of her, the common law husband. They had children together. I actually arrived at the scene. What I saw, it was going to be a homicide. Miraculously, she recovered. But she will now be paralyzed on the right side of her body for the rest of her life. And these, frankly, are just common stories that we deal with in domestic violence. Here is what was uncommon. The woman, after the assault, was rendered unconscious for weeks. And after they brought her out of the coma, she was advised of the arrest of the father of her children. And when she was able, she made an appointment to come and see me. And she sat in my office across from my desk and said this. She looked at me and said this: "Why are you doing this to me?" She did not want me to prosecute the man who had paralyzed her for life because he was the father of her children. And she said, "What am I going to do? How am I going to raise these children?" That, ladies and gentlemen, is domestic violence. And that's why we're here tonight, and that's why the people behind me are so concerned with domestic violence, and someday we're going to make it right. Thank you very much.